So now turning really to our concluding plenary panel on small states and big roles. I would like to say at the outset how I think it is amazing to see how a number of small island developing states or other small states currently engage very actively on the international level, giving true meaning to the one state, one vote principle of equality of the United Nations, taking it even further a step in playing leading roles. I'm thus honored to have with me here on the podium in presence, Ambassador Ronda King, permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the UN in New York and president of the Security Council in November 2020. And His Excellency Ambassador Azim Ahmed, permanent representative of the Maldives to the UN in Geneva. We have with us also online Her Excellency Ambassador Nazat Shamim Khan, permanent representative of Fiji to the UN in Geneva and president of the Human Rights Council, just out of a session of the council which took longer than expected, and that's also with us here online today. This panel will be opened with a message by His Excellency Minister Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th session of the General Assembly and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Maldives, which will be delivered by Ambassador Azim Ahmed sitting next to me. There were some technical challenges also in a video message as the President of the General Assembly is currently traveling. Now, the concluding panel will highlight good practices and lessons learned in securing the universal and meaningful participation of small island developing states in the UN system. It will do so in reflecting the link and connectivity between Geneva and New York. What leads states to go for such exposed and work-intensive positions? What is the national support needed to run for such an office? And in line with the main topic of today's conference, what impact had this international engagement and exposure on the national level? Did it strengthen the public and political support to multilateralism or the specific areas of work the country covered in the presidency period? Those would be a number of questions I'd be very much intrigued to hear more from our outstanding speakers. And I would like to hand the floor, first of all, to Ambassador Azim Ahmed, delivering the statement of the President of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid. So over to you, Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Felix. Good afternoon, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the 76th session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, has requested me to read out the statement that he wanted to deliver today. It reads as follows. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Geneva Human Rights Platform for organizing this meeting and providing me the opportunity to participate. I also commend the platform for providing a forum for small islanders to share insights and experiences on their engagement with the United Nations. Given their limited populations and resources, SIDS understand the value of multilateralism and the need to engage with the UN to ensure its efficacy and endurance. I assure you, we are seizing every opportunity available to us to do just that. The successful election of Ambassador Shamim Khan to the 2021 presidency of the Human Rights Council, the election of St. Vincent and Grenadines as a non-permanent member of the Security Council under the leadership of Ambassador Ronda King, and my own election as a president of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly are testament to this. Excellencies, my election as the president of the General Assembly reflects the trust and responsibility that the international community has vested not only in me and my country, but also in SIDS. As my colleagues here will attest, the decision for a small islander to run for such an office is not taken lightly. Indeed, it is almost as though an entire island comes together and agrees upon such a decision. That is because our histories and our contexts have built in us the need to collaborate and cooperate to survive. That reliance upon collaboration extends far beyond our respective shores. We look to other seats, to EOSIS and regional bodies, to the UN as partners, as friends. We understand that to engage and participate is to ensure survival. We understand that the only way that the challenges we face will be addressed is when we join hands and collaborate for the greater good. That, Excellencies, is what I plan to do during the 76th session. I am President of the General Assembly, representing 193 countries, but I am also a small islander, and my presidency is very much a small island presidency. This is a sentiment that I am sure is shared by many of my peers. For SIDS, the UN offers the ideal platform, not only to stand as one with the international community, but to present a unique SIDS perspective to presenting global challenges. You will see this perspective reflected in 5 priorities, the 5 rays of hope that I have chosen for the 76th session. Vaccines for all, recovery from COVID-19, addressing climate change, advancing human rights, and revitalizing the UN. These are global concerns, to be sure, but they are also concerns shared by my own people. Excellencies, that brings me to the crux of this statement. The issues relevant to SIDS are also relevant to LDCs, middle-income countries, and to highly developed economies. We are all in this together. Our exact contexts and experiences may differ, but we face a common set of global challenges. Nowhere in this is this more evident at this moment than the fight against climate change. Much like COVID-19, the threat is global. Yet unlike COVID-19, the threat is existential. Never before have we faced such a challenge. As President of the General Assembly and as a small islander, I stand fully behind ambitious and accelerated action. I am pleased to say that I will be conveying a high-level thematic debate on climate entitled Delivering Climate Action for People, Planet, and Prosperity on 26th October to mobilize the international community and build momentum for partnerships. My message on this is simple. We are capable. It is my intention to use this event and subsequent engagements to highlight the incredible innovations of human ingenuity, the power of renewables, the reliability of adaptation technologies, the sheer magnitude of resources that exist, and emphasize that as a species, we can overcome this challenge if we work together and channelize our will for the greater good of humankind. Excellencies, before closing, allow me to reflect briefly on the single largest challenge faced by SIDS in engaging in the UN and the multilateral system, resources. With small populations and small resources, it is near impossible for us to be everywhere at once. With the ever-growing workload of the UN, of the Human Rights Council, of the Security Council, of the GA, SIDS are stretched thin. For SIDS, this means that ever closer collaboration with partner countries must be prioritized. For the international community, it means that more decisive actions must be taken to ensure that SIDS can meaningfully participate in multilateral events and engagements, including through resource support. To my esteemed colleagues from SIDS, I say this: just as we plead for inclusion and participation, let us be the ones to extend the hand of support and engagement to empower others. I heard this myself when I visited the Maldives just last week and spoke with young people, with women, and with civil society groups. They are more finely attuned to what the UN is doing than ever before. They are engaged, they are watching, and they expect results. Let us prioritize the participation of youth, of women, and of civil society groups in all that we do. I have made this a priority for my presidency, and I hope that you and all others in power can do the same. Excellencies, I thank you again for the opportunity to speak and commend you for this engaging and thoughtful forum.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Azim. Azim Ahmed, for delivering this statement of the President of the General Assembly. And I think if you allow me to, in the discussion part of the session, I would also again come back to you personally and the achievements that also just in this very Human Rights Council session your country, along with other small countries, has had in terms of the recognition of the right to environment. But let me now turn to Ambassador Khan, the President of the Human Rights Council, who is with us, as I mentioned, online today. The presidency of the Human Rights Council is held for the first time by a representative of a Pacific small island state and a small island developing state. You just concluded your third session of the Council successfully yesterday, and we're grateful to have you already now again here with us today. So the floor is yours, Ambassador Khan.
Thank you very much indeed. And in the traditional greeting of Fiji, Bula Vinaka to everyone. Good day. It's a pleasure to speak to you, and particularly on this subject, which is a subject which is very close to my heart, and that is how multilateralism works for small countries, for small island states, and how it already has shown great progress when we look at recent events in the United Nations. But first of all, can I extend my thanks to the Geneva Human Rights Platform for organizing this concluding plenary on this topic, a topic which I consider to be absolutely central to the discussion about multilateralism and how it works and how it is able to show flexibility in really embracing the priorities of small island states. May I say also that it's a great honor to participate in this panel. We have just heard a message from His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of the Maldives, now, of course, as a matter of great pride, the President of the 76th session of the General Assembly, also with Her Excellency, Miss Inga Ronda King of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, again, as a matter of great pride, currently serving as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. And of course, my friend, my brother, His Excellency, Mr. Asim Ahmed, the permanent representative of the Maldives in Geneva. So it's a star-studded crew, and it is a great privilege to be part of this group in addressing what I consider to be a very important issue. But may I say also that the persons on this panel have already shown with their principled leadership that it is a model, really, for small states, a model of multilateralism, which they have themselves celebrated and shown to the world that, in fact, multilateralism works better when it is truly inclusive. So I do wish to say at the outset that I'm a great supporter of small states taking greater leadership roles in the United Nations. And I say this also because of my own experiences. I am a Fijian, and as you've already said, I am serving as the President of the Human Rights Council. This is the first time the small island developing state has reached the heights of the presidency of the Human Rights Council. And I think it's a very significant step, and for three reasons in particular. Firstly, I believe firmly in multilateralism. We in the global community face problems that cannot be solved unless we work together and we face them together. And we know also at the multilateral level that it's very easy to get involved in discussions between and among states that are large or wealthy or powerful, to the detriment of small state participation and to the detriment of the global community's ability to problem solve. If we get so involved in political issues of a particular type, then the majority of the world's population really get lost in translation because the discussions are not discussions that are helping them. So when small states take on leadership roles at the United Nations, this ensures that our multilateral efforts are more inclusive, and therefore in a much better position to solve the common problems that we all face, small and big. The second reason I say that this is such an important issue, and it's closely related to my first point, it is this, that small states sometimes face acute challenges that are not necessarily priorities for larger or wealthier countries. And so therefore, these are less likely to be addressed as robustly at the multilateral level. So when you elevate small states to positions of leadership in the United Nations, it does give greater attention to the challenges that we all face. And we've just heard the message from His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, talking about how important the climate change challenge is, how important that that is embraced at every level, and what he is doing to ensure that the attention of the world is on the issue of raising greater ambition. So it's a classic example. And it is exactly the example that I would rely on in relation to the Human Rights Council. When the Human Rights Council first started to have conversation about human rights, when it transitioned from the Commission on Human Rights, there was very little discussion on climate change and human rights and the relationship between both. Yet we small island states are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and we continue to experience the adverse human rights impacts of climate change. We have seen in the context of climate change violations to the right to life, the right to adequate housing, the right to safe drinking water, to sanitation, many other rights as a result of increasingly frequent and intense, slow and sudden onset natural disasters. And we're increasingly seeing, for instance, the amalgamation of this discussion in the context of displacement and climate change. But it's ironic that despite the fact that this is an urgent issue for us, that it is an issue that we discuss daily, that the Council never adopted a resolution on this subject until our friends from the Republic of the Maldives introduced and sponsored a resolution on human rights and climate change at the 7th session of the Council in March 2008. So it was only then really that a formal journey began at the Human Rights Council on this relationship between climate change and human rights. But that enormous step, and we cannot underestimate the importance of that step then built momentum for the greater recognition of the adverse impacts of climate change on human rights at the Council. And as you have already heard, and I'm very happy that I was present to hear the summaries of the session from your rapporteurs, because as you've already heard, at the recently concluded 48th session, the Council adopted a resolution entitled The Mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights in the Context of Climate Change, that has for the first time created a special rapporteur on the negative impacts of climate change on human rights. And this was a journey that was begun by a small island developing state, the Maldives, in Geneva. And here we are at last with the creation of a special mandate. So it really is an achievement, and it does show how significant membership of the Council by small islands and the voices of small island states has become. This resolution was led by small islands developing states. This is the resolution which was passed only on Friday. And that was led in particular by the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, my own country, Fiji, together with, and this was an interesting and very strong partnership, together with the European Union, Panama, Paraguay, and Sudan. And the resolution ensures that the Council will have an expert specifically dedicated to addressing the impact of climate change on human rights, which is a key mandate. And it will ensure that smaller states like ours, the problems that we face particularly acutely, are on the agenda of the Council. And this has as much to do about the relevance of the Council to the world, to the global community, as it does to the problems that we small island countries face. So it's a matter of mutual relevance, and actually it exalts the status of the United Nations and its agencies because it shows its ability to be flexible and to respond to the needs of small countries as well as larger ones. So as was shown from the adoption of the resolution in March 2008, led by the Maldives, to the establishment of a special rapporteur in this recently concluded 48th session, that small states do have to lead the way. This is not a matter in which we must rely on others. Small states really have to lead the way to ensure that issues that are important to them get the attention that they deserve at the Council. It's also very important that small states, including the Maldives, also threw their weight behind the resolution adopted also last week on the international right to a safe and healthy environment. And it's quite extraordinary that that resolution was only passed last week, when many constitutions around the world, the majority of UN member states, have the right to a safe and healthy environment protected in their national constitutions. And yet extraordinary hesitation before we were able to recognize it at a United Nations agency. It was a key moment in the history of the Council. It was a proud moment. For those of you who were watching, the entire Council broke out in applause that at last we were able to recognize that every individual in the world has the right to live in a safe and healthy environment. And I'm very pleased that this happened in the same year as COP26. I think it really does add momentum to discussions on the significance of climate change to everyone, small and large, and particularly the role that small countries can play in what I consider to be a very significant journey. So the third reason why I think small states have much to contribute to the world is our cultural traditions. We have innovative governance structures. We have policy mechanisms, and we bring unique perspectives across a variety of issues to the multilateral arena, which have not necessarily been heard in relation to the histories of other countries. I think we change the nature of the conversation. Our experiences, for instance, with trying to build racial harmony in our countries, with trying to build gender equality, with cultural barriers, with discussions with faith leaders about issues like gender equality. I think these journeys and these discussions are valuable for the Council because it does show that every country has a particular unique position on the way in which it has taken this journey towards implementing human rights. We must all agree that human rights are important. How we get there is something that we know from the debates in the Council we cannot always agree on. But the fact that small island states are able to bring to this table of the Human Rights Council and other United Nations agencies their specific journeys really helps us all to understand the complexity, the uniqueness of the journeys that we have all taken. So important really to ensure that we hear each other's voices and each other's stories. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by highlighting the importance of small states supporting each other. And we have already heard this from His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, but I think it's very important that we support each other. We have very similar histories in many ways, and often we do not vote or follow any particular type of party line. And so what we do bring to the table is our experiences as small states, what we have struggled with, and how much we want to achieve. And so the fact that we are able to support each other in various mechanisms which bring small states together, I think this is really important. And I would like to say that I myself saw this kind of collaboration and cooperation when I was elected to the position of President of the Human Rights Council. And I have seen it in many, many occasions in the past. So collaboration, I think, is important, and the sharing of the experiences we have is important. So on that note, I would like to end there. I know that we have a question and answer session following this. I look forward to any questions that anyone might have, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you, Ambassador Khan, for your statement and for pointing out those many reasons actually how multilateralism is important for small states and how small states are important for multilateralism. We have heard from the General Assembly, from the Human Rights Council, and I would like to turn now to Ambassador Ronda King, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the UN in New York. And thank you also for coming over from New York, actually here, contributing to the Geneva, New York debate and really more of an interconnectedness in those, for those settings. In June 2019, St. Vincent and the Grenadines became the smallest nations to secure a seat at the United Nations Security Council, assuming its presidency for November 2020. Earlier, you already served as a 74th President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council in 2018. Could you share with us your experiences from those functions, please? So the floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Felix, and fellow panelists, colleagues, participants, good afternoon to everyone. Let me begin, Felix, by saying that it's truly an honor and a privilege to interact with you today. I'm grateful to the Geneva Human Rights Platform for this invitation and just like Ambassador Ken before me said, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. As small island developing states teeter on the edge of a climate apocalypse, as religious, ethnic, and indigenous minorities agitate the world over for justice and equality, and as many women and other marginalized groups toil restlessly in this 21st century for basic dignity and liberty, the global struggle for greater freedom remains largely incomplete. In these remarks, I will focus on the why and the what of SID's engagement, and I will leave the how of building capacity and lessons learned for the interactive session. Let me enter this discussion this afternoon by painting a picture that illustrates how I see the role of the small state, or SIDS. The ant is considered one of nature's most industrious and productive creatures. Always on the move, building, burrowing, lifting, transporting. If the ant were to suddenly become extinct, it will cause a devastating destabilization of our planet's ecological systems. On the other hand, if the human animal was suddenly rendered extinct, there will hardly be any impact at all. Why? Because according to E.O. Wilson, famed American biologist and ant specialist, we have become the most destructive creatures on the planet. And this is precisely because of our excessive, ill-considered busyness, non-productive producing, carelessness, and greed. If, according to E.O. Wilson, we were to log stack every human being, all 7 and some billion of us, we will occupy little over 1 cubic mile of space. Yet each human being has a very large ecological footprint. And if we were to use the human being of the developed world, especially the American human being, to illustrate the point, and according to E.O. Wilson, we would find that he requires 24 acres of land to support his lifestyle of busy acquisitiveness. So if the rest of the world were to follow this model of the good life, we will require, Wilson foretends, 4 more planets Earth to sustain this current level of busyness. But this, of course, you already know. I draw this picture today merely to suggest that the small state is the ant's equivalent in the multilateral system. We do much of the unglamorous but vitally important work that keeps the multilateral system churning. Above all, we are the conscience of the multilateral system. SIDS do not believe, and small states do not believe in megaphone diplomacy. Norm setting and thought leadership are more the aim, and agenda setting regarding issues that affect many of the disadvantaged and the less influential. We heard this perspective elaborated quite eloquently by both of my colleagues before me. Like the ant, we quietly and sometimes not so quietly busy ourselves with chipping away at big things little by little. We try to cut new pathways, sprinkle new seeds, and endeavor to change mindsets, always with the aim of creating durable solutions. So colleagues, let me flesh out that a bit and put some concrete examples of our agenda. During the pivotal decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, a renewed multilateralism is urgently needed, one that prioritizes the collective good, safeguards our global commons, and guarantees justice, fundamental freedoms, and essential human rights, including the right to development for all peoples and across all countries. Indeed, We can no longer afford a status quo multilateralism that merely tinkers with the pre-existing political economy, nor can we maintain an archaic modus operandi in which the norms and rules of the current international order are inconsistently applied or upheld only when convenient to do so. It is a truism that the complex and consequential questions that circumscribe humanity's current condition would not be solved by outmoded arrangements of economic might or military power, nor will they be settled through vain quest for hegemony. Only through concerted multilateral action, guided by the timeless principles of international law, and with enduring ideals of unity and social solidarity at the very core, will we solve the urgent peace and security development, humanitarian and human rights challenges of our time. As a small island developing state that grapples incessantly with a huge bundle of debilitating forces, afflictions that are both historical and contemporary in their causal makeup, St. Vincent and the Grenadines' international posture has been one of advocacy and activism to reform the system not only on the terms of the powerful, but to serve the interests and priorities of all nations and peoples. Matters like Security Council reform, the Sustainable Development Agenda, reparatory justice, and a proposed restructuring of the international financial architecture to consider the exceptional circumstances of small island developing states, including our vulnerability to climate change, the development of the multidimensional vulnerability index, are what occupy our foreign policy agenda. On the matter of Security Council reform, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has advocated consistently for an expansion of the permanent membership to include countries from Africa and small island developing states as a continuously rotating fixture, as those most affected by violent conflict, with the majority of the Security Council's agenda centering on African questions. A more proportionate representation of African voices on the Security Council will lead to more strategically sound outcomes for peace and security and for human rights, the nuanced perspectives of small island developing states who are most exposed to the hazards of climate change, including its risks, its security risks, and the challenges they pose for human rights and freedoms. Would also add legitimacy, relevance, and fair-mindedness to the Security Council deliberations. On the Sustainable Development Agenda, we continue to underscore the importance of a nexus approach at the institutional level, where all organs of the United Nations, the General Assembly, Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and the Human Rights Council work together to comprehensively address peace and security, development, humanitarian, and human rights challenges. The nexus approach should also, philosophically and practically speaking, guide the interactions and responses of all stakeholders in the field. It follows, therefore, that climate change should be incorporated as a thematic issue across the nexus. While the UNFCCC remains the primary body to address climate change, all UN organs should systematically incorporate the issue of climate change in both analysis and prescription. So you see the line, Felix addressed where you found St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we are going across the organs, making sure that, like Ambassador Khan said, agenda setting, being there to help, to contribute to the conversation, to help set the agenda. On reparatory justice, we contend that decolonization agenda remains substantively incomplete. SIDS are the conscience, or small states, more broadly, are the conscience of the United Nations, ever mindful that the biggest contribution the UN made to us as small states is that it has become illegal for major and medium powers to invade and occupy small states. With only a few exceptions, small states have been able to live in peace, and we keep our idealism and optimism alive. we also consider it our solemn duty to advocate resolutely for all global stakeholders to uphold the bedrock principles of international law, in particular the UN Charter, principles of sovereignty, sovereign equality, and political independence. In concluding, although despite our small size and historic bundle of limitations, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has had the honor of sitting as an elected member. You've heard that before. We have served as president of ECOSOC. We have I have chaired also the Fifth Committee. Before that, we lead the L69 group of developing countries, the majority of which are SIDS for the last 4 years in the intergovernmental negotiations for Security Council reform, among other facilitation roles in the UN General Assembly. You know the saying, if you are not at the table, you are on the agenda. So we are trying to be also at the table. Our engagement and contributions on all issues, including that of human rights, have been principled and pragmatic. The central tenets of social and environmental justice and equality, cooperation and solidarity, and a bona fide multilateralism lie at the fore of our small island developing states' international engagement. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this statement. And indeed, it's very encouraging to hear how you see also apologies. So thank you very much for that statement, and also to see how in alliteration to the natural environment, you see the role and the continued work of small island states. I think also interesting that the issue of climate change has actually come up in the reflections linked to the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and the Security Council. So I think this is also a very important sign of where small island states bring in an issue very pressing to them, actually just as pressing to all the others, but maybe more visible already at the level of small island states into that debate, and really manage to push it to the fore. Before opening the floor, I would like, if I may again turn to you, Ambassador Azim Ahmed, because also we heard actually Ambassador Khan mentioning, making reference also again and again to your country back in the 7th session of the Human Rights Council, working then on the resolution on climate change, but in particular now linked to the recent Human Rights Council session, I'd like to point out the substantive engagement also by small states that led now to a major breakthrough in the Human Rights Council, as we just heard, the resolution carried by Maldives, Costa Rica, Switzerland, Morocco, and Slovenia on the global recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And so if I could invite you to just share some reflections with us. We heard on the systemic engagement of the SIDS, other small states actually, and of that meaning, but also on the thematic side, if you'd like to say some words on this very recent success. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Felix. It's a great privilege for me to address this gathering and to be part of this discussion today. I think it's very useful and it is very valuable. As Ambassador Khan mentioned, the Maldives was at the forefront of the first resolution that was presented to the UN on the environment. That was in 2008. That led to the establishment of the independent expert on environment at the first time. And then now it has been changed to a special rapporteur on environment. And then on last Friday, we also heard about the appointment of a second special rapporteur, this time on climate change. So all these efforts were initiated and undertaken and carried by small states. This is a landmark achievement for small states and for all states. This is something that, given the diversity of the UN, it has been very difficult to achieve. But we found that given our common problems and our common future, that it was in the interest of all to come together and proclaim environment as a human right for the first time. We worked with, as you've heard, Costa Rica, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland in putting the draft resolution together, and also to conduct very difficult negotiations with large number of countries with diverse views and interests. But we managed in the end to come together and pass this proclamation. Also, as you heard, the right to environment is not new to many countries. Over 100 countries already have it in their constitutions and in other legislation. In the Maldives, we have it in our constitution. So that helped us to move on this very much. This would also encourage other countries that do not have it in legislation at the moment to include it in their legal frameworks. This has also empowered civil society and calls for environmental protection and environmental promotion of environmental resource use become a lot louder now. For over a year, of course, we have been working on this with our core group members. And it was during the last half of the 2020 that we actually came together and came up with a draft and to be promoted, to be presented at the 48th session. This resolution also recognizes the linkages between environment and human rights, and also the interlinkages with a wide range of human rights and the environment. It's not only as a right to protect the environment, but also including the right to sanitation, the right to health, the right to life. These are important rights that this resolution now brings together. And then, of course, in the future, we will have more specific, implementation issues for this. As we approach COP26, this is also a particularly momentous time to bring out a right like this. This will be an important contribution from the Human Rights Council and the UN system to COP26. Once the right is recognized, of course, people can demand more. And then also, it also increases accountability in terms of providing. The UN will also now have the mandate to monitor the progress in protecting environmental resources and the environment as such. The resolution also provides an important avenue to address the negative implications of human rights arising from environmental degradation and can be prevented, especially for the most vulnerable populations, including children. And as you know, there were over 100,000 children and young people who also called for this right as we were in the process of developing the resolution. Hundreds of civil society organizations also came together and joined the chorus on calling for a right. All these actors have been very instrumental in addition to the states that were actually doing the formal part in bringing this right and recognizing this right and in encouraging others to be a part of this process. At the moment, 37 member states do not legally recognize this right. And we hope now is the chance for them to also go back and rethink this issue and include it in their national constitutions or in other legislation. The Recognition of this as a right also highlights the important role of national human rights institutions. Now, their mandate also will be expanded, and they can now look at issues of human rights and their linkages with the environment. So their role has been expanded, and national human rights institutions will also have an important role to play in this. That briefly is the background in the process that we went through in bringing this right. If you have any specific questions, I will be happy to engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you. And here, I think this might be also the first part of how actually we can learn from ants, because it's not ants, but hundred thousands of human beings actually claiming that right. And also what you heard before, not just the trickling down of a right declaration, but actually the moving up of the claim for a right and the recognition. So I think this will be points maybe to discuss now in the final discussion of our day. And I would like to open the floor for your questions and comments here in the room and also online. So just to repeat, for those online, you can raise your hand, and we can also your electronic hand, and we can give you the floor. You can also simply take the floor by sending some comments and questions in the chat, which my colleague Domenico Zipoli with us here on the panel will be monitoring and bringing up, just to bring it to the attention of the panelists. So I see a first hand physically here in the room. So please, over to you first.
Hello, thank you for this session. I just have a quick comment and a question. So I had an opportunity to intern with the Fiji mission in the previous HRC session, and it was really nice to see firsthand how the small island states are taking the leadership in various important resolutions. My question is with regard to the ecocide, which the new draft has been is being done. So what has been the role of, or how are small island states navigating and taking up the issue of ecocide and ensuring that it actually becomes a crime? It actually turns from a draft to an actual crime in the coming years. So how have small island states been navigating around that? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so for the moment, we have 2 more questions here in the room. First, back to the room. Ashley, please.
Thank you. Ashley Bow from the Pacific Community, where we're an international development agency that's governed by our 26 member states, most of whom are small island developing states. So Excellencies, thank you so much for your presentations, which I'm sure all of our members would have appreciated greatly. It's really encouraging to hear of the growing influence of small island states within the Council, the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly and the Security Council. One area where progress, from a Pacific perspective at least, where progress hasn't been quite as notable is in the composition of the treaty body committees. My understanding is there's only 1 serving member from any of the Pacific Islands, and he is the first and only, Justice Vui on the Child Rights Committee. What can and is being done at the international level to address this discrepancy? Is there anything that we can do at the regional level to help address this? And are there any lessons from any of the other small island developing states in other parts of the world that have had more success that we can learn from? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. And again, still inviting people also online to put up their questions, but I have 2 more in the room. So over to you, and then come back to the side of the room.
Yeah, thank you everyone for a great presentation. And previously, just for a general disclaimer, I had worked with the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, during which we had engaged with Pacific small island states, especially their civil society organizations, to engage with the UN mechanisms. So my question is, how are the states, the small island states, ensuring that its civil societies get to engage with the mechanisms, considering all the challenges which members themselves face in terms of treaty body access and everything? So it's obviously much more paramount for civil society networks. So how are the small island states facilitating that? If some thoughts on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a further question here also in the room. Midun Kotari, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Excellencies. I had 2 questions. One is, we went through many years of debate before the right to water was recognized as a human right by the Council, and now the right to a sustainable environment. And I just had a question on, and whilst, as you mentioned, so many constitutions have already recognized these, why does it take so long for the Human Rights Council to reach consensus on what's appear to be very common sense issues, right? And the reason I'm asking this question is because, I mean, does that mean that as we go forward, whether it's COP26 or, you know, in the future, that the implementation of these historic resolutions is going to run into the same problems? So that's one question I have. The second one is more on the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR. Within this panel, we are supposed to be discussing also ways to strengthen technical assistance and capacity building for the SIDS countries. And do you see the UPR as a mechanism that is helping in that process? And what can we do to strengthen the UPR itself? Because it appears to me to be the right mechanism to bring all this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And actually it tempts me also to add on something, because some maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we did a study actually also looking at the universal approach to human rights, universal in the sense of the universal participation. And obviously the Universal Periodic Review is hailed always for that mechanism to which everybody participates equally. But when looking actually also into who does not just submit to the mechanism, but who recommends actively in the mechanisms, there were quite some stark differences, which goes probably along with your question of the participation in UPR also in the role of a recommending state. Would we have further questions here in the room, or again, I'm turning to the online audience, but for the moment, unless my colleagues spotted some questions that I didn't see in my settings here. No. Okay, so well, with this, I would like to then give the floor back to the three of you. And Ambassador Khan, you're with us online still. And so if maybe we can start with you first of all, if you would like to address all or some of those questions that just came up here from the audience. So I'm handing the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. They're all really good questions. And may I say how heartening it is that so many people from the participants are either Pacific Islanders or have worked closely with the Pacific community. So it's good to see that level of interest from the Pacific. I have to say that one of the greatest challenges of working with the Council and at the Council was ensuring the relevance of the work we do to the Pacific region. Because, you know, if you were to ask many people in my region, you know, do you know what the Council's doing? Do you know how important it is? I'm afraid the answer that you'd get is, what's the Council? From many. And so a huge challenge was translating the work of the Council to our region. So it's good to see the level of interest from this audience about the relevance of the Council to the work we do in the Pacific. So may I say very quickly about ecocide, and lovely to see a member of the Fiji mission here. Welcome. May I say this, that like genocide, like crimes against humanity, like the crime of aggression, these offenses were not in the past necessarily part of the domestic legislative framework of all countries. But one really important way in which these offenses have become offenses nationally is through the work of the International Criminal Court and the rule of complementarity. So in order to escape the jurisdiction, if you like, of the ICC, a country can show that it is able and willing to prosecute within its own shores. And the first step to that is ensuring that particular offenses fall within the same jurisdiction as the court. So I think in relation to environmental crimes and widespread environmental crimes, I think increasingly we are looking at international institutions and tribunals to help us to define this. We know that many people die because of environmental crime. And we know also it's very dangerous to be an environmental human rights defender in many countries in the world. And so I think this is a very important discussion. I think the more we have it, the better. And I do believe that this resolution last week is an extremely important step in the international governance of the environment. I heard the question that Ashley asked, and a very good one, about getting more Pacific Islanders onto the treaty bodies, and I agree absolutely. You know, I get names as the president of the council of persons who were recommended by the consultative group to be special rapporteurs, independent experts, and so on, and I never see any Pacific Islanders. So I agree that the Pacific is underrepresented in all the mechanisms of the United Nations, including treaty bodies, but also including the mandate holders. But I think all the regions are aware of this. And so one thing that the consultative group is required to consider in recommending appointments is to consider regional representation as well as gender balance. So we can only say that without sacrificing merit, because merit must at the end of the day always be the guiding light for appointments of this nature. But in considering merit, experience, for instance, with the Pacific Island region, I think is something that's really an important factor when appointing certainly a treaty body membership, and awareness that the Pacific is underrepresented, I think is a very important factor. I agree with you totally. I wish there were more Pacific Islanders on the mechanisms of the United Nations. In relation to UPR, I am one of the greatest supporters of the UPR process because it's an equalizer. Every country is treated in the same way. Every country is demonstrated in the public eye to have problems. There is no perfect human rights country in the world. And there we are, warts and all, each country, discussing the difficulties that we have in our human rights journeys, whether you're Denmark, whether you're the United States of America, whether you're Nauru, you know, whether you're South Africa, there you are going through exactly the same process. So the UPR is one of the most valuable mechanisms of the United Nations. It is an equalizer. And this discussion about environmental rights has really seen a greater focus through the UPR process. When I first arrived in Geneva, when Fiji first opened its mission in 2014, not a single question was asked about climate change and human rights of states by other states, because of course it's a peer review process. Now with added numbers of small island countries in Geneva, opening missions, participating in the discussions, we are hearing more and more recommendations on this relationship between climate change and human rights. And this is a real strength of the UPR. It's a process that needs to be further strengthened. And this is an important question, which of course was asked by Milun about, you know, how do we strengthen the process? I think the important thing about the UPR process is to try and avoid it as being a platform where you examine and ventilate bilateral issues. I'm afraid that occasionally we get recommendations from the floor, which is about, you know, why are you recognizing this state or that state, or why aren't you doing this on our borders? Actually, the UPR process is not about that kind of bilateral difficulty. There are other avenues for it. Every country is supposed to use it for this human rights journey that we're on. The other way I think that we could strengthen the process, and we're currently having a consultative process within the auspices of the Human Rights Council about how we want to see the UPR pan out. And there are some delegations which believe don't touch it. It's perfect. We all love it. If you mess with it, then we're going to end up with something that nobody likes. But there is also a very strong feeling that we should either give more time to the UPR or less time to the UPR in terms of the recommendations. So I have to say this, that the question of how to strengthen it is currently on the work program of the Council. The co-facilitators which are looking after this particular stream are looking at it very closely, and we look forward to a report back on the 6th of December at the organizational meeting. And I think it's specifically going to look at the question of how you ensure that we can enhance the UPR. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Secondly, of course, we've now entered the review period of the Council. We still have no consensus in Geneva as to whether the Human Rights Council should have a say in the review of the Human Rights Council. We have no consensus, and we haven't yet formally been asked by the General Assembly to express any views. But I think the UPR process, which is such a valuable part of the work of the Human Rights Council, will almost definitely be under discussion, certainly in the General Assembly, in looking at the review of the UPR. So I would just urge, for those who are fans of the UPR process, and I am, and I know that Milun is, I would say this, that we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel here, multilaterally, to ensure that there is no backsliding on the value of the UPR process. It's one of the most valuable things we have. And in addition to UPR, the question of how we implement UPR recommendations continues to be a challenge. And again, I would say that many countries are now looking at national mechanisms for implementation, follow-up, and reporting. The NMIRF model worked so well with the leadership of Paraguay using a digital form. Ashley knows it well. He was one of the persons guiding the implementation of that process. I would say that the implementation of the NMIRFs would really see a more cohesive way of implementing the recommendations made during the UPR process, but also would ensure coherence with SDG implementation and treaty body recommendation implementation. And in that package must surely come how countries are implementing this right to a safe and healthy environment. I'm sorry for speaking for too long, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And indeed, you made a lot of links also to the earlier sessions of this conference when we exactly looked into the roles of the NMRFs and also all the kind of reporting and especially connecting between treaty bodies, UPR, and also the SDGs. So thank you for that. Can I turn to you, Ambassador Ahmed, also to reply to some of the questions? I think there was also still outstanding the question, the parallel of right to water and right to environment, why it took so long and what implementation challenges might be lying ahead. I don't know if you would like to address this or of course any of the other points that were raised by fellow panelists or the audience. So over to you.
Thank you, Felix. No, these are very relevant and very, very pertinent questions. And there is no single yes or no answer to these questions. Since we first brought in the resolution in 2008, a number of activities have actually taken place. And the work of the special rapporteurs has been particularly important in bringing out environmental issues that countries face at the country level and onto the Human Rights Council for general debates. This has been very important. And of course, that is also debated in the General Assembly by the same rapporteurs who have a reporting obligation there. That has been very useful. And how long this process has taken, in the UN, of course, we work with a wide variety of countries that have different interests based on their own national conditions, socioeconomic conditions, environmental conditions. The challenge is to bring all these different views together and getting them to come and agree on a single binding document. But when I say binding, this is of course not legally binding, but is an expression of political will to address these issues. And that is where the success of these resolutions really is. Since the first environment resolution, many more actions have taken place and the relative time it has taken has shortened. And now we have a new right that has been proclaimed, which is a historic step forward in this. Even in that, everything we wanted is not in the resolution. You have some amount of give and take. And then, of course, then there are some core values that we would not compromise. And that is where the negotiations will go on. And that is what we have managed to achieve. And that is why this is such an important achievement. But in terms of environment, in terms of other questions that were raised earlier, there are a lot of gray areas. Even policy-wise, we don't know. We, of course, know about sea level rise. And sea level rise directly impacts small island developing states more than larger states. Maybe some coastal regions in larger states also will be subject to submersion if sea level increases. But the question I would put to you is, what about territorial integrity of small island states if the islands submerge? These are issues that law of the sea will now also have to consider, and there will be a constant process of engaging with the countries and developing relevant frameworks to address these new issues that arise in relation to the environment. That is a particularly important issue for a lot of Pacific countries, and also countries like the Maldives. We are in the Indian Ocean. So do we now then protect our existing territory, even though land may submerge? These are issues for which there are no clear answers and there are no easy answers. But these are issues on which, within the multilateral system, we need to engage and stay engaged. That is the only way we can address these issues. And this is why the growing engagement of small island states at the multilateral level becomes so important, so that our voice will also be as loud as anybody else's. And that becomes very important. The other issue of implementation, I think, which is a very pertinent question. There will be a lot of challenges, especially in terms of the resources. According to the Paris Agreement, the amount of resources that are supposed to flow into the developing world for environmental protection is about $1 billion short per year. We need to really rethink international financial architecture, as Ambassador King had also noted in her presentation. That will be a key. The business as usual type of assistance that we are going on with now, that would need to change. Otherwise, small countries will not have the resources flowing into them to protect their environment and to protect their citizens. That will be one of the main challenges in implementing resolutions like this. There has to be other mechanisms that are set up to enhance resource flows. Otherwise, we will backslide on these agreements that we have come to. So that is what we must avoid. And this is where multilateralism will play a crucial role, not only the UN, but also the international financial institutions. They have to come together and work with the UN and countries to ensure that a viable financial formula is brought forth in order to allow sufficient resources to flow into these countries. And I think that would be one of the key challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I would come over to you, Ambassador King, also for some concluding remarks of this panel, actually. I thought it was interesting to hear from the Maldives how actually the international exposure led to people being more aware and more attuned, as it was said in the president's statement, to what the UN is doing. So there was more awareness, evidently. On the other hand, we heard from Fiji that people did not necessarily know what the Human Rights Council was. How would you see that for your country, actually? How is that? And you mentioned it, quite a sustained exposure, actually, in multilateral UN positions of your country, of yourself also. How is that reflecting in society? Would you see a change there? And also maybe in that sense, if you had, additionally to the questions that we of course heard and that you may want to address as well, any personal advice also you'd give to other representatives of small island developing states in taking on or not such roles, and of course, how can we enhance learning from ants?
Thank you. Thank you, Felix. Let me start by touching on some of the questions that were posed, if I may. I jotted down some responses. Like Ambassador Can on the issue of representation from our colleague in the back, representation on bodies like the treaty bodies. And I dare say a representation across the UN system, because there is, you know, a dearth of representation. The CARICOM caucus, so we are conscious of that. And I'm happy to report that just recently, the CARICOM caucus of PRs in New York recently established a committee to review the underrepresentativeness of SIDS broadly, and more specifically CARICOM SIDS, toward ensuring that we are aware and pursue candidates in our region. So this is an example of capacity deficits, really, because our missions tend to be small. We don't have one person over there doing candidatures and seeing when the deadlines are, what is coming up. So we simply don't have time to review. We are not aware, we are not plugged in, but we are now making a concerted effort to ensure we've had robust engagement within the UN system. So what we want to do now is also look at the various committees and bodies to ensure, similarly, our citizens are aware of vacancies in the various areas. So now there was a question from the gentleman right here about why does the Human Rights Council take so long to make decisions, I think was what you said. So, and I think that this is the nature of the multilateral system. I do believe and wholeheartedly that small states can play a role in consensus building. And we heard from the rapporteurs earlier, and my colleague panelists as well, the importance of building relationships, networking and collaboration to facilitate bridge building and inertia. So allow me, I want to use the moment to plug or to give an example of what one P5 member on the Security Council, the place where decisions are really taken. So I don't think it's the human rights. I don't know how they compare in terms of decision making and getting things done. But one P5 member has recently said that the mechanism that SVG, along with the 3 African countries, is actually or are responsible for creating in the Security Council is what a mechanism called the A3+1 formula. And that's the 3 African seats on the council and then SVG. And many people were perplexed when it came into being. And I'm using this example because of how decisions, how small states get themselves involved, and as an example of collaboration. So the A3+1 is what we call a concentric circle of cooperation. We know that 70% of the council's business is in Africa. 70% of its files covered in Africa. So what we thought we will do, we campaigned in operating as a 4th seat for Africa on matters related to Africa. We promoted African solutions for African problems. So we cooperate with the A3 as if we are the 4th seat on matters of and that has been an important development because we are constantly advocating for African solutions for that perspective. So the same thing we do for climate, we are now doing it in the council on issues related to Africa. And people have paid attention. They are now consulting. So it's early days. it has been in existence for 2 years. Well, not quite 2 years. So it's early, but the idea of concentric circles of influence, the same for the establishment of the IEG on climate change. The IEG is an informal expert group on climate and security, because we have big powers that do not agree with having it on the agenda. So there too, we are advocating within that small group. It expanded to almost, I think we are about 12 members. So I don't think India is part of it, Russia or China. And last year, the US was not a part of it, but this year it is. And we are hoping to have a resolution on climate change. So I'm showing you that just what the panelists, so it's a good place to end where we started, just where the rapporteur said, the importance of collaboration, the importance of, I was writing down, adapting to local needs, and adapting to local needs is where the collaboration comes. When you get the perspective of the local, you build on that, and networking. So the A3+1 formula is a concentric circle of influence, and as is the IEG, the informal expert group on climate and security. So to answer your question, we continue the advocacy. We continue, yes, the multilateral processes are slow because it's a large number of countries that must weigh in, but by amplifying the voice, by having smaller groups collaborating and insisting on being heard, this I have found that decision-making helps. So, and one last example, I was going to give the example on the area for civil society. Someone asked about what the gentleman in the back, how do small island states advocate for the engagement with civil society? So, for instance, Haiti, we all know the plight of Haiti. So this week on the 15th, the A3+1, we are the +1, but it's driven actually and organized by the +1 because of the fact that we are from the region. The platform is actually built with civil society because they are not being heard within the council necessarily. We speak to governments. So, so now perhaps as many as 50% of the main briefers will be civil society, hearing from them. So we continue to do our part in ensuring that the entire citizenship gets an opportunity to have their voices and perspectives heard. So with that, again, I thank you very much for this opportunity to engage on what we do and how we do it. So thank you, Felix.
Thank you very much, Ronda, for those reactions to the questions. And thank you indeed very much, Your Excellencies, for your statements. I'd also like to acknowledge the statement by the President of the General Assembly at the beginning of our session. This brings us now to the close, not only of this plenary panel, but actually of the whole conference. And so just in closing, if we reflect on the day, I think, what did we hear about connectivity today? Very rich discussions, actually, both in plenary and thematic sessions, which I am not able to summarize just now. But there are some takeaway points that I take for us for the future work of the Geneva Human Rights Platform. I think more important than ever is the realization of human rights depends on networks and cooperation at national as well as international levels. If this is for small states or big states, but definitely also of the interaction in national human rights systems with civil society, as it was just pointed out again. While over the last years, we spent a lot of thinking on how to foster the cooperation and connectivity at the international level with the treaty bodies and other mechanisms and action and actors necessary for the realization, we should focus also in a similar way on the connectivity on the national level and on bringing the international mechanisms closer to the national realities. And I think they're also of the CRC Samoa example that was cited in an earlier session. At the Geneva Human Rights Platform, we have projects underway in this regard, such as the piloting of focused treaty body reviews inspired by Christoph Haynes, whose leadership enthusiasm we miss very much. We have also a project on special procedures of the Human Rights Council, measuring with them the effectiveness of their national engagement. The conference actually encourages me to continue and expand those. We heard also about the lack of knowledge, the need for capacity building, and in this sense, I'm delighted to mention that the new additional mission of the Geneva Human Rights Platform will be the creation of a training hub for practical trainings on the use of the Geneva-based human rights mechanisms for national stakeholders, civil society, but also governmental stakeholders. And we will do so in cooperating with a lot of the co-organizers of the sessions of this conference today. I think also just when hearing again the ambassadors speak about the Universal Periodic Review and its upcoming 4th cycle, that the systemic approach to the UPR, how to enhance, to use the words of Ambassador Khan also, the UPR will be something that we'll be looking into more closely. Finally, I think this concluding panel was proof that all actors, including and in particular small states, can move the international debate, given that the political will is there. And this is for me very much an encouragement, and I take away from this conference, and I thank you actually very much for this, and will reflect on how to better work like an ant. Finally, I'd like to thank all those who did so, all the speakers and moderators, the co-organizers, the interpreters, and the support staff of this conference. In particular, I'd like to thank you, Domenico Zipoli, who was the driving force actually behind this whole conference. I'm happy you're sitting with us also here at the concluding plenary table. Also my colleagues, Chloé Naret, Yasmin Arias, Tatiana Avante, and Natalie Mivlas, who helped us with organization, communication, and the whole running of this conference. And again, of course, the Swiss Confederation for their steadfast support to the Geneva Human Rights Platform, which allows us to hold debates and to connect people exactly like we're doing today. And thank you to all of you very much for making this conference a success. So thank you very much for your participation with this closing the day. Thank you very much and goodbye.